A man who does not have self-control is like a city that has no protection, that has no wall around it.
That's true, especially Marcus Aurelius. He talks a lot about self-control. Now, emperors before him, if you know much about history, did some awful things, some diabolical things. They let their lack of self-control, they let their greed, their desires just go wild. Today's episode is powered by Huel. Let's jump into the episode. I really like this channel. I really like Dry Creek Wrangler School, and I really like Dwayne and the advice that he gives. I love the way that he speaks, and his advice is just piercing. It goes through the barriers that you've built up, or the preconceptions you have about life, you know, or the doubts you have. These things, the way he talks, the advice he gives, it's just so relatable and understandable. Maybe that's just to me. Maybe not everyone can resonate with this, but I personally feel that way. So when I seen this video titled Stoicism and Christianity, I had to click it straight away. So I have already watched this. But first of all, Stoicism, of course, I've been studying it for over a decade. I've wrote a book on Stoicism. So I was excited to hear Dwayne's thoughts on Stoicism. I already know he spoke of Stoicism a little bit. But then I always get asked the question, can you be religious and Stoic? Are these things compatible? So I was very excited to hear his thoughts. I think he's a very grounded, level-headed man, and his advice is very good. I think he's very wise, very humble. So I was very excited to hear what he had to say.
It's known, people who follow the channel, people who know me, know that I'm a Christian, and but they also know that I have Marcus Aurelius Meditations.
Marcus Aurelius Meditations, that's a book. It's one of the most popular self-help books. It's the first book I read about Stoicism, but it was just the emperor's personal diary that he wrote for himself when he was leading the Roman Empire, and he was on the battlefield actually, and he was writing these things to just help him. But Stoicism is just throughout the whole book. Marcus Aurelius was a Stoic, so of course all the things he was writing were influenced by the philosophy of Stoicism.
A lot of the advice and counsel I give goes back to a lot of the thoughts on Stoicism, but I am very much a Christian. So I've had people ask me, Dwayne, what is the difference between Christianity and Stoicism?
I've never actually been asked that. I always just get asked, can I be a Christian and a Stoic? All the time. People say, can I be a Muslim and a Stoic? Or can I follow this faith and Stoicism? Or some people might even criticize me and say, you can't do these things.
Or what are the similarities? Or how do you justify being both? I have in my library, I have a book called a Jefferson Bible.
I love how he's always got a cigar in his videos, and he's so passionate about cigars. Yeah. It's just a nice character trait of him that I enjoy watching. It's quite relaxing, his videos are, especially the way he talks and the way he is. And even with his cigar, he's always very like calm and careful. I don't know, you get this sense when you watch his videos. But this book he's talking about, I'll let him keep talking.
I approach meditations like the Jefferson Bible. Many of the thoughts and the viewpoints that Marcus Aurelius puts down, as was taught to him, of the Stoics, is much older than the Stoics.
So the Jefferson Bible, and I had to look this up after watching this video, and I read the Jefferson Bible after watching this video, and I completely agree with his points. First of all, really good read, the Jefferson Bible. And I learned so much, but I started reading it and going like, damn, this feels like reading a mixture of the Meditations and the Enchiridion, the Discourses of Epictetus, and then the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. It feels like a mixture of them, but then it's also from a different angle, a different perspective. It's really good read. And this is something I noticed reading as I started also reading the Dhammapada, and you start to realize they're very similar. It's just a different perspective, a different way of approaching these things.
The Greek philosophers that put these viewpoints down didn't come up with them on their own. They weren't the first ones to make them up. Okay, if you sit down with a copy of Meditations and the book of Proverbs in the Bible and start reading them side by side, you will find that much of what is in Meditations was written thousands of years before.
I've always wondered this actually. Where is the source? Where was the original source? And was there an original source? Did it come from a development of humanity and society learning these philosophies? You know, a lot of Stoicism goes back to Cynicism, because Zeno, the founder, learned from Crates, the Cynic. And then a lot of the virtue ethics that comes from that is in Stoicism and Cynicism comes from Aristotle's virtue ethics. And then who did Aristotle learn from? And then who did the person Aristotle learn from? And then how far back do these things go? And like I said, you know, you read the Jefferson Bible, you read the Dhammapada, and you start to realize that they're teaching very similar things, just in different ways.
In the book of Proverbs and in the book of Ecclesiastes. Dwayne, why read the one as opposed to the other? The book of Proverbs was written by Solomon. Solomon's expression would be, just his method of expression would be closer to Confucius or Sun Tzu than it would Milton or Byron or, you know, whoever. And I'm just talking about because of the Asiatic, Oriental culture and way of saying things. So what I like about the Greek...
There's something I actually noticed with reading other works, is a lot of them teach you the same things, but they're understandable in a different way. And some of these books may take a Westerner a long time to adapt and understand because it's just so new to them. These ways of thinking are not ingrained in our society. Whereas things you read in the Meditations are very understandable. I think that's why Stoicism is so popular at the moment, because you can pick up these books from an emperor from thousands of years ago or a slave from thousands of years ago, and it just makes sense. You're like, oh yeah, this makes sense. I can do this. I can do this principle, this Stoic exercise, very easy. But then you read the works of Confucius, and maybe you have to adapt. You read the works of Sun Tzu, and you have to adapt a lot more, and it's a lot harder to understand. But a lot of the teachings are very similar.
Stoicism, and yeah, I know Marcus Aurelius was Roman, but much of the Roman culture side of things came from the Greeks.
Yeah, the philosophy was written in Greek because it was the language of philosophy, and yeah, it was very influenced by the Greeks.
They have a Western way of thinking, and more importantly, they have a Western way of expressing what they're thinking. So you can take the same truth as expressed by Solomon, or you can take that truth as expressed by Marcus Aurelius. For someone who's just starting to get into this, Marcus Aurelius speaks that truth in a manner that the Western mind will quicker relate to. You say, yeah, but it's not God. Well, it's not God, and I go through Marcus Aurelius like everything else. I discard that which I don't agree with, because they do throw out, you know, they don't talk about God. They don't talk about the deity.
The Stoics do actually talk about gods. They were pantheists. They believed that sort of like everything was God. But they refer to Zeus, because Zeus was the figure at the time. So they talk about God a lot, actually, in the Meditations and the Enchiridion. They talk about God a lot. And, you know, like Dwayne is saying here, I discard a lot of this because I don't believe in Zeus. I don't follow Zeus. I don't follow the rituals and teachings that they would have back then. But it doesn't mean I discard Stoicism. I mean, I've been studying it for over a decade. I've been practicing it for over a decade. So I don't disregard this. And this is the same with a lot of things now, even just like YouTubers that give advice, or, you know, self-help teachers. I may not agree with everything they say. I may not completely agree with their lifestyle, the type of person they are, but it doesn't mean that their knowledge on neuroscience, say, or their knowledge on dopamine, for a better example, isn't very important to me, because they've studied their life in this field of neuroscience and dopamine as their specific study, and they know a lot about this. They can teach great advice about this. Just because I don't agree with all the other things they do in life doesn't mean I should disregard this. And this is the same with, Confucius and Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus. They lived different lifestyles. Marcus Aurelius was the emperor of Rome. He did things that we would never do. It doesn't mean we disregard all of this.
So that part, of course, is just like Jefferson's Bible. I discard it. I go through and I look for the good stuff. Let's take horsemanship. All right. There are a lot of horsemen out there, horse trainers and horsemen, that teach the same thing. They teach the same concept. They teach the same philosophy. But you can watch one and say, that just doesn't quite click. It's not that I disagree with it. It's just not quite clicking with me. And you can watch another one and who has a different approach to it. Just maybe his cadence and his speaking and his accent and his approach and the way he looks at things. And maybe he's a little more academic and whatever. And you can say,
there's actually a really good way to think about things that I just realized listening to this again is, people like Alex Hormozy. If you know of Alex Hormozy, he gives business advice, but he also gives really great life advice. There's thousands of people like Alex Hormozy giving advice like Alex Hormozy. And I've seen these thousands of people online, and I've never resonated with any of them. I've never really cared about any of them. But then I come across Alex Hormozy, and suddenly I'm listening to all his books, I'm reading all his work, I'm listening to his podcasts, and he helps me so much in life. There's people giving the same advice, doing the same pursuit, trying to teach the same things, but they just didn't resonate with me because the way they speak. Alex Hormozy, just really easy to understand for whatever reason. And this is the same with these books, Some things, don't disregard things, the whole thing, because sometimes you can resonate with certain parts. You can resonate with certain teachers. You might read the works of Marcus Aurelius and go, I can't resonate with this emperor. But then you read Epictetus and go, damn, this guy was a slave, and then he was freed and became a philosopher, and his teachings are really understandable. Sometimes he's a bit sarcastic and a bit funny. Sometimes he's a bit exaggerative. I can relate with this stuff.
oh, I get it. It makes sense. He's saying the same thing he's saying. He's just saying it in a way that I can understand. And sometimes today, the wisdom of a man being a good man, approaching life in a wise way, it's written right there in Proverbs and in Ecclesiastes and in other places in Scripture. But sometimes it doesn't hurt to read it when it has been.
Yeah, so basically all these philosophies, all these people in some way were trying to teach you to be a good person and how to live a good life. And they had different ways of doing this. They had different methods. But that's the basic understanding, that they're all trying to teach you how to be a good person. You know, Aristotle was doing this. The Cynics were doing this. The Epicureans were doing this. The Stoics were doing this. And then a lot of religions, all these religions are doing the same thing. But to someone that grows up in a certain way, certain philosophies, certain religions don't really make much sense to them because it's not part of their culture. They haven't understood these things. Now, it doesn't mean they can't understand these things. It's just a lot harder. So a good entry is to, like Dwayne is saying, with Stoicism, is very geared towards the Western mind, very understandable. So you can pick this up and understand it, and then you can develop from there. You can start reading about Taoism or Confucianism, and you'll start to go like, oh, I understand the core of Stoicism. This makes sense now. I'm reading Confucius. It makes a lot more sense. I'm reading Taoism. Oh, they're kind of interlinked, they intertwine.
Reformatted to fit a different mind, a different approach, a different look. That's why I don't have a problem with Christians reading Stoicism. All right? If they go through it and they understand that the stuff in there that is...
That's good for any Christians that have got a bit of worry about reading Stoicism. I remember I read recently about a boy whose dad punished him for reading Stoicism, saying that he's gone against his faith. And I don't think he's gone against his faith reading about Stoicism. Stoicism's teaching us to be a good person. It doesn't conflict faith.
Against God, you just ignore it and throw it out. But a lot of it is just a reframing of the wisdom of God from a Western viewpoint and a Western way of looking at things. Okay? All right, there's truth in there. And a man, Proverbs says a man, and I'll butcher this. This is not even remotely close to a quote. But a man who does not have control over his own spirit is like a city without a wall. That's just one of the things. It's like back in those days, all cities, however small, 1,500 people, 1,000 people, they had a wall built around them because it was lawless. The time was lawless. And bandit bands were huge, and so they all had protection.
This is a really great analogy. I always teach of the fortress. You're building this fortress of your mind in the internal world, the world you control. You control yourself, and you don't control the external world. So if you compared the external world to, like he's saying, these bandits and the lawless world, this chaos around us, we don't control all that, but we can build this fortress and prepare ourselves to deal with all that, so that these bandits don't just penetrate into our minds and seep into our psyche. This is a quote from Conor McGregor, actually. It's that nothing external can affect the internal if the internal dialogue is strong enough. If you can build up the internal, build up this fortress, you can prepare yourself against life.
And a man who does not have self-control is like a city that has no protection, that has no wall around it. Okay? Well, you can go read in Marcus Aurelius, and that's what it talks about. A man with self-control.
That's true, especially Marcus Aurelius. He talks a lot about self-control. And this comes from the idea, remember, it's his personal diary, and he was the Emperor of Rome. Now, emperors before him, if you know much about history, did some awful things, some diabolical things. They let their lack of self-control, they let their greed, their desires just go wild, like crazed bandits, and they did some awful things, some really horrible things. And Marcus Aurelius didn't want to do this. He grew up, his mother, she was very wealthy. She owned a company that supplied bricks and tiles and building supplies. Her company supplied the Colosseum, the Pantheon. So she's very wealthy, and she taught him from a young age, you don't want to stay clear of the habit. She said, stay well clear of the habits of the rich. And he did. So he wrote in his meditations about self-control and moderation because he didn't want to do all these horrible things. He wanted to be a good person.
You cannot change what goes on around you in the world, but you can change how you react to it.
That's the dichotomy of control. You don't control the external world. You don't control all this externals, but you control the internal, how you respond to the external. So you focus on this fortress.
All right, so there's a lot of that. So I don't think they're opposed to each other. I think there are things in that book that are not of God, that are not about God, that rejects the divinity. And so you're going to find that in anything you read just about. You're going to find things that are not exactly right.
Yeah, and of course it's not going to line up with certain things. It was written thousands of years ago. Stoicism was started in 330 BC by Zeno of Citium. It was a long, long time ago, and things have changed since then. So, of course, some things you can discard, but you don't discard the whole of something because you don't agree with part of something.
So just ignore it and go on. But I do think it is a very important, profitable book for Western civilization.
I agree. Meditations is very important and very helpful, as are all the Stoics.
A quick word from our sponsor, Huel. I really like Huel. When I was writing my book, I was using Huel to power me through every single day. When I had my daily greens, when I had my meals, when I had my shakes, It stopped me from going to the shop, buying a load of rubbish, buying a load of unhealthy food, wasting loads of money. And these things do add up. Those quick journeys to the shop every day, the money adds up, the unhealthy foods add up, the wasted time adds up. So if I ever get those cravings, I grab a Huel and it fills my cravings. I feel good, it tastes delicious, it's quick and easy. And if you have any interest in the Huel products, then check the link in the description. Let's get back to the episode. One thing I'd like to say, first of all, Dwayne's advice, it's great. And I like his perspective, very level-headed. One thing I'd like to think, and I'd like to know your thoughts, is, and maybe I don't agree with him on everything, is he's saying it all comes back to God. I'm very curious where this knowledge comes from. You know, I haven't researched history to understand these things. I don't know how far back it all goes. I can take it very far back beyond the Stoics. But at some point, my knowledge fails me there. Where does this knowledge come from? If we talk about Stoicism, and we understand that the Stoics learned from the Cynics, and the Cynics learned from many people before them, like Aristotle's virtues, where does all this come from? Where does the line end? Where can you say this was the origin? Can you do that? I'd love to know in the comments where you think all this comes from. Maybe Dwayne's right. And I'd like to know if in the comments you can tell me why Dwayne's right. I'd love to know. So leave in the comments. Tell me where this knowledge comes from, or where it's adapted from, or what you think about this knowledge. Because I'd be really interested to learn this. So leave that as a comment. And thank you for listening. This was day 43, Stoic School, with the author of The Everyday Stoic. I hope you have a wonderful day, and thank you for listening.